been told that you should write a book. You've gone through a transformation, you've grown from a trauma, and you've been told you should write a book about it, or you feel within yourself that it's time for you to get your book out there, but you're wondering, how in the world am I going to do that with everything else I've got going on? I got you. The Truth to Transformation Book Bootcamp. It's coming up starting August 31st, and it runs through the entire month of September. 30 days and 30 minutes a day. It's a book bootcamp that will help you get your book done. I'll walk you all the way through my framework so you can get very clear on your book's purpose, who your reader is, and get clear on the ideas you want to share in your book, picking the type of autobiography you want to make to approach your audience, and then doing the work of getting the content on the page. I'm walking you all the way through that. And yes, your book will be edited so that by the end of the 30 days, your book will be self-published ready. Especially for someone like you who is super, super busy. This is going to be the game changer for you. This is going to help you move the needle. Even if you're halfway done with your book, maybe you're not starting from scratch, this bootcamp is still great for you. So go to bootcamp.melissathomas.co/sign up. That's bootcamp.melissathomas.co/sign up. And Melissa is spelled with 2 L's and 2 S's. Go to that website, sign up for your spot today. I'm only allowing 10 spots, so be sure to get your spot today. Going through the story of my symptoms of my depression. So now I'm sharing details so that they can see and feel for themselves, the reader will. Like, oh wow, this is what depression feels like, OMG. Those details are necessary so that the reader can either know what to look out for or self-identify. Good evening, happy Wednesday, my winners and goal getters. Welcome back to the Getting the Win Show. I'm your host, Melissa T, the Procrastination Bully. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. Our mission with this show is to help women who have navigated a trauma or transition find healing through writing and publishing their first book. So if you're tuning in and this sounds like you, welcome. Glad to have you. As you can see behind me, books are my thing. I love anything having to do with words, even the jacket, like there are words all over this thing, okay? That's me in a nutshell, and thank you. So I pray this episode will be beneficial for you. Today, we are getting into the nitty-gritty of how to structure a chapter. You might be somebody that you have a book idea, you're convinced that, okay, I'm going to do this, but you're like, okay, how is this supposed to look? Even if you've watched my previous episodes on creating your word web and then creating an outline, and even if you understand the cheat code of voice recording, I talked before about the fact that we talk more words than we type them. We talk them faster, right? We speak on average 150 words per minute. So in 10 minutes, that's 1,500 words, which is pretty amazing. Now, if you talk fast, obviously you're going to put out more words than that. So you might be like, all right, I did all your steps, Melissa. I've done my word web. I have my outline and I've done my recording, got the voice to text function. Great. Whether in Google Docs, Microsoft Word, whatever. Great. I have a bunch of words on my page. What am I supposed to do with this? Seeing the words alone might have you overwhelmed. Is that your feeling? Is that you? If so, put yes in the chat, or like OMG, I know that feeling. Put that in the comments below if you're watching here on YouTube. Like, that's me, right? I got you. If that's your struggle, or you're like, okay, I haven't done the words on the page yet, but I'm about to, and I have this question. Like, what do I do once I put the words on the page? I got you. All right. In this episode, we're covering the structure of a good readable chapter. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the structure, let me first remind you of something that might be blocking you. You might be wondering, who am I to do this? Is this still a good idea? Like, why should I go through this? Why should I go through this process? Let me remind you that you are a natural storyteller. As a human being, you are a natural storyteller. So just think of it that way. Your book will be beneficial because you're sharing your story. And if you haven't heard before, let me just share this common adage with you. Facts tell, stories sell. And for your book to be someone else's survival guide, you'll need both. Facts tell, stories sell. And you are a natural storyteller. So you're probably wondering, or maybe you struggle with that idea like, well, my story, nobody wants to hear my story. Nobody is going to consider my story credible. Or option number 3, and this is something I struggled with, you might be thinking, my story's boring. Who's going to want to hear from me? Allow me to tell you, there are still folks that are going to want to hear from you. Let me turn a little bit and point to this. Moving Past Potential. Carl Wesley Phillips. That's his journal, so that's not the book itself. But I promise you, Carl Wesley Phillips is an introvert's introvert, okay? This is a man that has a degree in biology, and yet his career right now is video editing. If you haven't heard a previous episode where I talked about his book in detail, let me share this with you very quickly. This is a gentleman who, very introverted, doesn't like to rock the boat. He's a lot like me. You know what I mean? I don't like rocking the boat either. It's just that these days I understand that there is a time to do so. And I've been called to do so. For those of you, if you're somebody that has that story in you, I'm rocking your boat so your story can come out. Like, that's my assignment, right? Carl, unbeknownst to him, had an assignment to share his story with the world of how he was an introvert and all of the different mindsets he struggled with before he was able to literally move past his potential and be successful. He had an assignment to share that story with the world. And once he did, he was able to see just how many people appreciated his story. For someone who had a degree in biology, going on to a master's in video production, he was able to share all of that and marry those two worlds together in an unbelievable fashion. And he fed the souls of literally thousands of people with his book. He had no idea of the impact he was going to have. If you're not familiar with Carl Wesley Phillips, he is one of 4 in the Secret to Success podcast, very successful podcast, hosted by E.T. the Hip Hop Preacher, or Dr. Eric Thomas, and C.J. Quinney. So Carl is that third voice. The fourth voice is, of course, Jamal King. And hey, people like me who are introverts, we walk up to Carl all the time and say, thank you for speaking on the podcast. You're talking for us. Okay? So there are people waiting for you with your story to say, thank you for talking for me. Thank you for giving me language for what I was experiencing. Thank you for helping me feel seen. That is what Carl did with his book. He helped introverts feel seen. Now, I'm not saying you're an introvert necessarily. You might not be. But you might be wondering if your story is a little too boring or undeserving of the attention, or you feel your trauma is so steep that you're reluctant to share it with anyone. You're reluctant to relive it in the process of getting this book out. But allow me to assure you that 1, your pain is valid and valuable. Let me say that again. Your pain is valid and valuable. What you learned through the process of overcoming the trauma or going through the transition is going to be valuable for the person that's going to read it. And you are capable of getting those words on the page because you're a natural storyteller. Even if you are someone who's introverted and don't talk that much, that's okay. You're a natural storyteller. So now I'm going to get into the details and the procedural stuff of how to write a good page turning chapter. Okay. But I wanted to get the first part out of the way to make sure you can move the needle and get those words on the page in the first place. Okay. So the first thing you're going to want in your chapter is a hook of some kind. Okay. You're listening to somebody who is a copywriter. I've written email marketing. I've done website landing pages. And the purpose of copywriting is to write things in a way that persuades people to take action. I'm also an 8-time self-published author and a former blogger and a former journalist. So the hook is the first thing. In all of those disciplines, you're going to hear that same thing. You want to open with a hook. That hook can be a curious line that's going to lead people into your story, or it can be a statistic that's relevant to your story that's like jaw dropping. One great example of this is The Diary of a CEO. This is Stephen Bartlett. He has a incredible podcast, if both on audio and on YouTube. And his team is phenomenal in the way that they create hooks for their episodes. So a recent episode, he has two great minds on a conversation about the impact of artificial intelligence on our cognitive development or cognitive decline. And the way he hooked us in was with a statistic. He opened up the clip for the video saying that constant use and dependence on AI is leading to a 47% drop in our cognitive sharpness. Like our brain use, our brain sharpness drops by 47%. And this is according to MIT. So this is not fake news. This is not some kind of false study. Like MIT did this study on people who are using AI to do their writing. And they said that dependence on AI led to a 47% drop because there is something developmentally important about writing, about coming up with our own words, leaning onto our own vocabulary. So that statistic was the hook. And then it went into the conversation between two experts with Stephen in the middle, kind of as the audience, serving as the proxy for the audience. But that is an example of a hook. So you can open your chapter with something like that, a statistic that is relevant to the story you're going to share or the lesson you're going to teach in the chapter, and then going into your story or going into your lesson. All of your chapters, you're going to want those two things, the lesson you want to teach and a story from your personal life to demonstrate the lesson. Both of those things. Okay. If you're writing your book memoir style, then obviously it's going to read more like a narrative and you'll weave the lesson in as you're telling your narrative. So that's fine, but you're still going to have both elements. If your book is more like a guide, you can be more cut and dry with it. Like you can have your statistic or your curiosity statement to draw the person in, then cut and dry, do a subheading for your story, and then cut and dry, do a subheading with your lesson, or vice versa. Hook, lesson, story. The latter two are not set in stone in terms of where you place them. It's up to you for how you want that to go. It can be hook, lesson, story, or hook, story, lesson. That's up to you. If it's a memoir, it'll be hook, story with the lesson weaved into your story. That's fine. But either way, your chapter has to have those two things, your lesson and your story. And of course, which lesson you're teaching in that specific chapter, you will have already figured that out when you did your word web step and when you created your outline based on your word web. So you would already have that laid out. And don't worry, I'll put the link to that episode in the description so you can see it and click on it and take a listen. But that's how you want your chapter to go. Hook, either story then lesson or lesson then story, or if you're doing memoir, lesson, story with the lesson weaved in. Okay. So the hook can be if you're talking about not necessarily a statistic, maybe you want to start with a curiosity statement. You could start in the middle of the action and say, this made my jaw drop. Or you can be like, imagine, and then start with something that is happening in your story that you're about to dive into. When you use the word imagine, it automatically activates your reader's imagination because you're telling them to now picture something. So you can say imagine, or you can say picture this, and then go into a little bit of the story, something that will serve as the preview. So for me, I have my book coming out called The Pain to Prose Playbook. So in one of the chapters, I talk about my journey towards burnout. The hook I used was my present day. and then gave a hint calling back to the burnout. So you've likely heard, just as an example, you've likely heard speakers do this. They'll talk about where they are right now, and then they'll say, but it wasn't always like this, or, but I wasn't always like this. And then they'll go into their backstory, or they'll go into a story that is painful and difficult in their life. Lisa Nichols calls it the dip. So there's the first part of where they are now, but I wasn't always like this. Then we go into the dip, that difficult story. And then we come back out onto the top, because of course you don't want to leave people in a difficult situation. So you come back out onto the top, right? So that is an example of a hook. Okay. So if we're talking the rest of the chapter now, whether you're choosing your lesson or your story, in my example with the Pain of Prose playbook, that particular chapter I'm talking about with the burnout, I chose to lead off with my story first. Then I went into the lesson. So I started present day, in which case I was talking about me joining Dr. E.T.'s UOU Mastermind, Dr. Eric Thomas's UOU Mastermind, and the wonderful feeling I felt of community. And then I went into the burnout, because I wanted to show people where I was coming from to get to community. So I started with the beginning, joining the mastermind. Then I went into my dip and went into the full story of what I experienced in my burnout, the depression that I didn't realize I had. I was a high functioning depressed person, didn't know. And I went into even the story of that, about how my mom was able to point that out to me. And then going through the story rather, of my symptoms of my depression. So now I'm sharing details so that they can see and feel for themselves, the reader will. Like, oh, wow, this is what depression feels like. OMG. Those details are necessary so that the reader can either know what to look out for or self-identify. If the reader's like, oh, wow, this is what it felt like. Oh my goodness, I'm experiencing this right now. Like I need to do something about this, which is always the goal with any story that you're sharing, with any lesson that you're sharing. The reader, you want to pull the reader in so they can see themselves in your story and resolve within themselves, okay, I need to do something about this, which is then going to be the importance of your lesson in the chapter, because now you're giving them the instructions, which is what I did. After I shared the story of the burnout, I then go into the process I went through of joining ET's UOU Mastermind and all of the benefits of having community and how that was able to counter my depression and burnout. Okay. So I deliver the lessons and why joining a community is so important. Okay. So that's an example. The last thing you want to do, the way you want to round out your chapter, is give them a transitional statement that hooks them into turning the page and reading the next chapter. It could be something as regular and plain as, in the next chapter, we'll discuss so-and-so. That seems like it's boring, but it is still a helpful transition. Like you're like coding the process from one chapter to the other. So they're going to be like, oh, this is what I can expect, bet. And then they'll turn the page. Okay. So hook, whether that's a preview statement that's going to draw them into your story, a statistic. And the other hook I didn't include is a question. You can lead off with a question as well. And questions are good because the human mind is a problem-solving mechanism. So when you ask a question, that creates an open loop. It's like, okay, whoa. Now I want to read because now I want to see what the answer is going to be. Okay, so open with the hook. The next two elements are up to you which sequence you want to put them in. whether story then lesson or lesson and story. That's up to you. Or if you're doing the memoir, story with the lesson blended into it. Okay. And then lastly, some kind of statement, a transition statement that's going to lead them into the next chapter. Or quite frankly, that transition could be a question too. Your transition could be a question. Even if you don't open the chapter with a question, but maybe you want to close the chapter with a question, that's absolutely fine. You can do that. As long as that question is leading them into what the next chapter is going to be, then that'll make them turn the page or move their eyes to the next page if your chapter is ending on the left side. Okay? That is the high level structure of a good chapter. Real quick detail I want to get into or reiterate as it relates to your story or your lessons is make sure your stories are as visual as you can get them. Because remember, your reader is not there with you. They're not in your mind. So your book and the way you tell your story is the closest they're going to get to your memory. It's the closest they're going to get to living the moment by your side. So you want your story to be as visual as possible. Show, don't tell. So for instance, if you're recalling a situation where you were triggered, sure, you could say I was triggered, but the more visual way of saying that is my nostrils flared and I started trembling uncontrollably. They'll get it. You were triggered. Another element to that scenario to add, if you're someone that is of the fairer complexion, you can mention that you flushed. My nostrils flared. I started trembling uncontrollably and I could feel the blood rush to my face. Your reader will get it. You were triggered. So you'll want to share those details when you're telling your story. If it's a situation where you were disappointed or embarrassed, let's use the embarrassed strategy, right? You're talking about something that embarrassed you. You paint the full picture. Talk about the fact that your heart was racing. All the blood left your face. Maybe in that case, you were trembling uncontrollably as well, and you had to put your hands in your pockets to hide the trembling. Or you had to turn to hide your face or your expression. If you had on a ball cap, maybe you had to lower your head so people didn't see your face. Or maybe you were trying to speak and you can quote yourself in your story of you actually stammering, trying to form the words. Or simply say, my mind drew a blank. I couldn't find the words to say. All of those details that I'm sharing with you, those are all different ways of expressing embarrassment. But you'll want to be as detailed as possible when you're telling your stories so your reader can be in the feeling with you. They can feel the embarrassment with you. That will get them down the page. Because the goal of any writing is to get the reader from one line to the next, to the next, to the next, all the way down the page and on to the next page. That's the purpose of any sentence, is to get them from that sentence to the next, to the next, to the next. So the hook gets them to the first sentence in your story or the first sentence in your lesson, to the next, to the next, to the next. Okay? So when you're telling your story, be as detailed as possible. Paint the picture. And yes, even with that crazy statistic from MIT about 47% decrease in cognitive ability, that's if you're being lazy with the AI. I'm recommending you work with your AI as a tool. So if you need to go into ChatGPT and say, you know what, I need you to help me say this in a way that's more exciting or in a way that's punchy, depending on the tone of your book. Tell the machine the tone you want to use and give it the basic idea you want to express. Don't tell it exactly what your story is. We've had the conversation about AI and its impact on your IP, your intellectual property. So I'm not telling you to tell it your exact story, but give it the basic idea that you want to express and ask it to rephrase it in a way that's more exciting, that's going to hook your reader, and let it kick out the answer. And feel free to iterate as many times as you need to for it to give you what you're looking for. Don't just take that first answer, because that's likely not the best answer. Okay? But yes, be as detailed in your story as possible, as visual in your story as possible. Facts tell, stories sell. So the lesson is going to be important, but the story is what's going to be the glue. That's what's going to make it soak into their mind, into their souls. Because we can drop stats all day, we won't remember them or why they matter. That's why the stories are important. The facts are, the facts are important, but the story informs why the data matters. Okay? The stories make the facts matter. So, one more time. Hook, either story then lesson or lesson then story. And then lastly, end with a transition that will lead into your next chapter. Then one last thing I want to end off with, that as it relates to a chapter, this is optional depending on the kind of book you're writing. I'll also drop in the description, I talked about the different types of nonfiction books that are out there. So depending on the type of nonfiction book that you're creating, whether you're doing a guide, a diary style book, a memoir, a traditional autobiography, whatever the case may be, I'll drop that link in the description so you can take a look at that episode as well. But the last thing, this is optional for you, depending on your type, but perhaps either put a section for notes, whether that's blanks, or you can come up with a few reflection questions or reflection prompts at the end of your chapter. This last part is a cognitive way for the information you shared in the chapter to soak in. If your book is more like a guide, you'll definitely want to use this feature at the end of your chapter. Okay. So for you, if you're doing a guide, you'll do hook, either story then lesson or lesson then story. Then put your reflection section and then your transition. Or those two at the end can switch. Hook, story then lesson, or lesson then story. Transition to the next chapter, reflection section. But those are your elements of a good chapter. Because with the reflection section, then you're getting them to process what they just read. And for those who are speed readers, that's what's going to get them. Because you're like, oh, let me go back and look at this. Maybe I skipped past this. I read too fast. Or in my skimming, like I missed it. So that reflection section will help dig the grooves even deeper into their mind and their soul about the lesson you're trying to teach in that chapter. The story or stories will be helpful. And then that reflection section will get them to write, because now you're asking them questions and they got to answer them. Remember, the human mind is a problem-solving mechanism. If we're presented with a question, we're going to want to answer it. So if your book is more of a guide, or if you want to add that section, include that, because now that's going to get your reader to engage even more with your content and internalize it a lot more. You've hooked them with a question or a statistic. You've got their curiosity. You've led them into your story. So they now see themselves in your story. They can self-identify. And now you're leading them out with the light, with the lamp, with the lessons or lesson. So they can go, oh, I saw myself in the story. Here's how I can get out based on what you did. And now let me answer these questions to open my mind up, because your questions are going to provide another perspective, right? You're helping them think of a new way of doing things. They'll appreciate that. In a previous episode, I mentioned the journey I went through with my very first book, the From a Babe weekly devotional. And that was one of the first questions I got, one of the first bits of feedback I got on my book. The person said, this is really valuable information. Like, I loved the way you unpacked the scriptures each week. It was deep, but I noticed there was nowhere for me to take notes. Ding. So I learned the hard way about having that reflection section. And I so appreciated getting that feedback because I never thought about it beforehand. I never thought about it when I was writing the book. And that lesson stuck with me. Having that section where people can either write notes, it can just be blanks, just 2 blank pages, 1 blank page, up to you, where you're just leaving them blanks to take notes, or a reflection section where you're actually giving them questions to answer. That's helpful because they get to write. And going back to that statistic we heard with MIT, like 47% decrease in cognitive function, that's tough. So allowing your readers a space to write is going to be invaluable. So what did I do with that devotional? If you hadn't seen the episode, I'll tell you. When I did the updated version, I have a 2.0 where at the end of each week, I have questions. It's a 52-week devotional. Right now it's an ebook, but at the end of each week's devotion, there are questions to answer. That's the most recent iteration. First, there was the devotion with no questions in it. Secondly, that step in the middle, I created a Bible study workbook to go with the devotional. When I created the Bible study workbook, hey, business is business. The money wasn't moneying. Like the dollars wasn't dollaring. Like, it cost more to create the Bible study workbook than I would have made in terms of selling it. So what I did was this final step, which was converting and combining the two together. So if you look on my Amazon page and check out From a Babe 2.0, that's the combination. So instead of having the large size Bible study workbook and you having to buy 2 books, you're buying 1 book that has the questions at the end of each week. So you get the content, you get the devotional text, you get an original poem from me every single week that is relevant to the devotional text. And then the questions, the reflection questions. That way you get to write your answers down and you get to deeply reflect on the scripture and the lesson. So that's a concrete example. And folks appreciate that. So hopefully you found this episode beneficial. If you did, please hit that like button, spread it and let the algorithm spread it. All right. Hit that like button and drop a comment below. Drop your aha moments. What's one thing that you learned from this episode that you're going to incorporate? Like, are you doing the hook story lesson? Are you doing hook lesson story? Like, put that in the comments below and share it with your peoples. All right. Engage with this if you're watching this on YouTube. And of course, if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe on YouTube at Getting the Win. I am on Spotify, so follow me on Spotify, Getting the Win Show over there. I am on Instagram, Pinterest, and Threads at Getting the Win Show. So if you have any questions and you didn't put it in the YouTube comment, please, by all means, follow me on Instagram at Getting the Win Show and then DM me your question. I'm happy to answer, all right? And also, I am now on TikTok, Melissa T. Writes. That's Melissa T. Writes. In between time, thank you so much for tuning in. And stay tuned for next week's episode. We always bring the value, always come ready to take notes. But I hope you have a great and productive rest of your Wednesday and a great and productive rest of your week. Peace.